There is a version of what happened that night that the hotel never officially confirmed. The version they preferred was simpler. A minor technical difficulty, resolved quickly. The show went on as planned. That version is not the version the people in the room remember. What they remember is different. It is the version where everything that could go wrong went wrong, and where a man with a microphone and a voice decided that none of it was a reason to stop. The year was 1972, Las Vegas. The showroom was full. 2,000 people had arrived that evening expecting a performance by Tom Jones. They had paid for their seats. They had dressed for the occasion. They had eaten their dinners and settled into the particular electric readiness that a Las Vegas audience carries in the minutes before a show begins. The production team had been there since the afternoon. Sound checks completed, lighting cues set, the band warmed up, the monitor mix adjusted and adjusted again until the stage sounded exactly as it needed to. The opening sequence timed. The spotlight positions confirmed. Every element of the production verified against the plan. Las Vegas in 1972 had developed a particular standard for live entertainment. The shows were large. The productions were expensive. The audiences expected a level of professional execution that had been refined over decades of high-stakes nightly performance. Every major act that came through Las Vegas had learned to match that standard or lose their residency. Tom Jones had more than matched it. His shows were among the most technically complete productions that the Las Vegas circuit offered. Not because he insisted on spectacle for its own sake, but because he understood that a well-designed production served the voice. When the production worked, the voice was all the audience needed to think about. The lights, the sound, the careful staging, all of it was designed to remove every distraction and deliver the audience to the voice cleanly. That was the plan for Saturday night, 1972. Everything was in order. Then the power went out. Not the full building, the theater's dedicated electrical circuit, the kind of failure that does not announce itself in advance. The kind that simply happens in the middle of a Saturday night, in a room full of people who paid good money and dressed up and came a long way. The lights went dark. The amplifiers fell silent. The audience sat in the sudden quiet of a room that had been full of sound a moment before. For a few seconds, nobody in that room knew what was going to happen next. The showroom staff moved through the dark with flashlights. The audience began to murmur. Not panic. The restrained, polite uncertainty of people who had paid for something specific and were no longer sure it was arriving. The question in the room was not complicated, but the answer was not yet visible. He walked out into the dark room with a handheld, battery-powered microphone. Not a performance entrance, not the full production. No lights building to a crescendo, no band finding its first note, no spotlight tracking his walk to center stage. Just a man walking into a dark room, carrying a microphone. The audience could hear him before they could fully see him. He said, "We have a small problem with the electricity." A few people in the audience laughed. The kind of laugh that releases the tension of a room that wasn't sure what was happening. He said, "But I'm still here." He said, "And I still have a voice."
Then he started to sing. The first song without amplification was quieter than any Tom Jones performance that audience had heard before. But it was also more exposed. There was no production between the voice and the room. No amplification adding the dimension of size. No reverb filling the space. No carefully mixed monitor feed telling him exactly how he sounded. Just the voice. And the room. And somewhere between those two things, something happened that a produced show could not have produced. The audience stopped being an audience and started being something closer to witnesses. They leaned forward, not because they were told to, not because the lighting told them to focus, because the voice was in the room with them, in a way that amplification, for all its power, sometimes prevents. The voice was a person singing, not a production, not a spectacle, a person singing in a dark room. Between songs, he talked. He talked the way he talked backstage or at a table with people he trusted, not the managed patter of a performer between numbers, just a man in a dark room talking. He talked about Wales, about the working men's clubs where he had first performed, about how the stages there were not much more than a raised section of floor. He talked about how the audiences in those clubs were not patient with performers who weren't good enough. About how he had learned very early that the only thing between a performer and an audience walking out was the performance itself. Not the production, the performance. The Las Vegas circuit trained performers to deliver production. That was what the money paid for. The lights, the sound, the timing, the precise choreography of a very expensive evening. But what Tom Jones had learned, in Wales, in London, on 100 small stages before he ever saw a Las Vegas showroom, was that production could fail. The voice could not be turned off by a circuit failure. It was there when he arrived. It had been there since before anyone knew his name. It would still be there in the dark, with a battery-powered microphone and 2,000 people who had come expecting something else. He would give them something else. He would give them the thing the production was always trying to get them to, the voice itself. By 1972, Tom Jones had been performing in Las Vegas for 4 years. He had played the Flamingo, he had played the Caesars Palace showrooms, he had played the International Hotel in the same period that Elvis Presley had held his own legendary residency there. He understood the economics of a Las Vegas residency better than almost anyone not directly managing one. He understood what the hotel expected, what the audience expected, what the contract required. He also understood something that was harder to quantify. He understood what a room felt like when it shifted from entertainment into experience. Entertainment was what happened when everything worked. The lights, the sound, the production values, the careful management of the audience's expectations through a precisely timed program. Entertainment was reliable. It was reproducible. It was what Las Vegas had been built to deliver. Experience was something else. Experience was what happened when something unexpected occurred and a performer had to decide in real time what to do with it.
Tom Jones had been performing for long enough to know the difference between a night that went exactly as planned and a night that would be talked about afterward. The planned nights were good nights. The audiences were satisfied. The reviews were positive. The hotel management was happy. The nights talked about afterward were a different category. Those were the nights when something unexpected happened, and the performer had to decide in real time what to do with the gap between the plan and the reality. The nights talked about afterward were never the planned ones. Backstage, when the power failed, the production team moved quickly. Technicians with flashlights, radio communications to the building's electrical management, an estimate, uncertain, changing, of how long before the circuit could be restored. The initial estimate was 20 minutes. Then 30. Then something more indefinite than that. The hotel management appeared backstage. The preferred plan was to hold the audience in their seats with an announcement, apologize for the delay, and restore the production as soon as the technical team resolved the issue. Tom Jones listened to this. He was already dressed for the show. He was already in the particular state of readiness that a performer carries in the minutes before going on. That specific voltage that builds in the time between leaving the dressing room and walking into the light. He looked at the hotel manager. He had spent 17 years in rooms that were smaller than this. Rooms in Wales where the sound system was a single speaker mounted to a wall and the microphone was borrowed from the pub's PA system. Rooms where a technical failure meant you sang louder, where you sang until your voice carried to the back of the room on its own, without amplification, because that was the only option available to you. He had survived those rooms. More than that, he had learned something in those rooms that no Las Vegas production budget could teach. He said, "Do you have a microphone that runs on batteries?" The manager looked at him. Tom Jones said, "Then find me one." The power came back after 90 minutes. The technical team had restored the circuit. The lighting rig came up slowly. The amplifiers found their hum. The band, which had been sitting in the dark backstage, heard the signal and moved back to their positions. The production manager appeared at the side of the stage and indicated that they could resume the full show. Tom Jones acknowledged this. He looked out at the room. He said, "It seems the electricity is back." He paused. "Do you want to continue?" The room answered him, not with a managed applause at the moment the lighting rig instructed it, with a sound that came from 2,000 people who had spent 90 minutes in the dark, with a man and a voice, and no production between them, and who were, for reasons they might not have been able to fully explain, not ready for it to end. The answer was yes. The full show ran for another hour and a half after that. By the time Tom Jones walked off stage, he had been performing for nearly 3 hours. Not because the contract required it, not because the hotel had asked him to stay longer, because the room wanted him to. And he did not have a reason to say no. People who were in that room that night spoke about it differently from how they spoke about other Tom Jones shows they had seen. Not the full production ones. Not the ones where everything worked perfectly, and the lights hit exactly on cue, and the monitors were balanced exactly as the sound engineer had designed them. They spoke about the 90 minutes in the dark. The voice without the production.
the man talking about whales between songs. The moment when the room stopped being an event and started being a conversation between one person and 2,000. One woman who had driven from Phoenix with her husband to see the show said afterward, "We've seen performers in Las Vegas for 20 years. We've never seen anything like that." She didn't mean the technical failure. She meant what happened because of it. She meant the moment the production disappeared and something more honest took its place. She meant the voice in the dark and the stories between songs and the feeling, which she had not expected and could not quite describe, that she was in the same room with someone who was genuinely there. Not performing a version of being there, actually there. There are things about Tom Jones that his official biography captures well. The voice, the records, the television program, the Las Vegas residencies. The extraordinary longevity of a career that spanned 6 decades. There are other things that the official biography cannot capture. What he was like in a room when the production was gone and only the voice remained. What he chose to do with 90 minutes in the dark, in front of 2,000 people who had come expecting a spectacle and got something harder to name and longer to forget. What it meant that when the hotel manager came to him with a plan to hold the audience and wait for the restoration, he asked instead for a battery-powered microphone. He could have waited. Most performers would have waited. The hotel had a plan. The plan was reasonable. The plan involved a formal apology, a promise of restoration, and the professional management of the audience's disappointment until the production could resume. Tom Jones looked at the plan and asked for a battery-powered microphone. He did not wait. Not because the contract required him to perform, not because the hotel told him to, because there was a room full of people, and he still had a voice. And in Tom Jones's understanding of what performance was for, an understanding built in working men's clubs in South Wales, where the audience was close and honest and left when the performer wasn't good enough, that combination was, and had always been, the only reason a performance needed to happen. A room. A voice. Everything else was optional.